The encounter that changed everything. The courtroom was tense, thick with anticipation. Spectators filled every available seat, their eyes darting between the stoic police officer on the stand and the poised woman sitting at the defendant's table. No one had expected this case to gain so much attention, but as details had slowly emerged, whispers had turned into a nationwide discussion. Amelia Jefferson sat with her hands folded neatly on the polished wooden table, her expression calm yet unreadable. She had faced worse storms than this, much worse. But tonight, she was done staying silent. She was done letting people like Officer Reese believe they could manipulate the system unchecked. She glanced toward her attorney, Linda Polk, who gave her a small nod of reassurance. Across the room, Reese sat in the witness stand, his jaw tight, his fingers gripping the wooden railing as if bracing himself for what was coming. He had walked into this trial confident, his arrogance evident from the moment he took the stand. He believed his badge and uniform would shield him from scrutiny. But he hadn't counted on one thing. Amelia was not just any woman. She was about to reveal the truth that would leave him scrambling for answers. 1 week earlier, it had been a perfect evening. The Atlanta skyline shimmered in the distance, the hum of the city creating a lively backdrop as Amelia strolled down the sidewalk, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She had just left a birthday dinner for her best friend, Sherry's, a night filled with laughter, toasts, and lighthearted reminiscing. Her phone buzzed in her purse, a text from Jordan, her fiancé. "Jordan, you home yet? Miss you already." She smiled, typing back a quick response. "Amelia, almost. Be home in 10. Love you." The city streets were mostly quiet in this part of town, just a few cars passing by, their headlights flickering across the storefronts. Amelia felt completely at ease until she heard the sound of slow-moving tires behind her. Her instincts, honed over years of training, immediately flared. A police cruiser. She didn't turn around right away. Instead, she kept her pace even, resisting the urge to react prematurely. Over the years, she had learned that sometimes your safest weapon was control, controlling your body language, your emotions, and most importantly, your response to power. Then, the siren blared, short and sharp. "Ma'am, stop right there." Amelia exhaled, finally turning to face the officer. She recognized the look in his eyes immediately, a mix of authority and assumption, like he was certain she had done something wrong before she even opened her mouth. The officer, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped out of the patrol car, his uniform crisp and his badge gleaming under the streetlights. "We received a report of a woman matching your description acting suspiciously in the area," he said, his hand resting casually on his hip, too close to his holster for Amelia's liking. Amelia forced herself to remain composed. "Suspicious," she repeated, arching a brow. "Officer, I just left a restaurant a few blocks from here. I'm walking home." Reese looked her up and down, as if searching for a reason to validate his suspicion. Amelia knew this game well. "I need to see some ID," he said, his tone unwavering. She didn't argue. She had nothing to hide. With slow, deliberate movements, she reached into her purse, pulled out her driver's license, and handed it to him. He took it, glancing down at her name. His eyes flickered with something unreadable. Recognition. Hesitation. She couldn't tell. Amelia remained still as Reese stepped back, speaking into his radio. The seconds stretched into minutes. Her pulse quickened, but she refused to let it show. Then he returned, his expression shifting slightly, his stance a little more rigid. "I'm going to need to ask you a few questions," he said. Amelia's patience thinned. "Officer, do you have reason to believe I've committed a crime?" Reese's lips curled into a smirk, as if he enjoyed drawing this moment out. "You fit the description of a suspect from an earlier break-in," he said. "Just standard procedure." Amelia's heart pounded, not from fear, but from frustration. A break-in. She had spent the entire evening in a restaurant filled with witnesses. There was absolutely no way she could be mistaken for anyone. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice firm. "I can prove where I was." Reese ignored her. "Hand over your purse," he ordered. Amelia clenched her jaw. Every fiber of her being wanted to push back, to assert her rights, to call out this blatant abuse of power. But she knew better. She wasn't just any woman. She was an agent with the FBI. If Reese had any idea who he was dealing with, he wouldn't be this smug. But that revelation, that was a last resort. Taking a deep breath, Amelia slowly handed him her purse. She watched as he rummaged through it, searching for something, anything, to use against her. But there was nothing. No stolen goods, no weapons, nothing but a wallet, keys, a phone, and a lipstick. Reese's smirk faltered. Still, instead of backing down, his frustration grew. "I'm going to need you to come down to the station," he said. Amelia's stomach dropped. "You're detaining me?" she asked, her voice measured. "Just routine questioning," he replied, avoiding a direct answer. Amelia swallowed her rising anger. She knew exactly what this was, and she knew exactly where it was going. And so, for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to be handcuffed. The cold steel snapped around her wrists. The humiliation burned. The police cruiser's back door swung open. As they drove toward the precinct, Amelia stared out the window, watching the Atlanta skyline shrink behind her. She knew she had two options: stay silent and play the game, or reveal the truth and expose everything. She had a choice to make, and Officer Reese had no idea just how much he had just messed up. The truth no one expected. The police cruiser rumbled through the streets of downtown Atlanta, its flashing lights reflecting off storefronts and office buildings. From the back seat, Amelia Jefferson watched the city blur past, her hands still bound in cold steel cuffs, the weight of them pressed against her skin, but her mind was sharper than ever. She had always known how easily power could be abused. She had spent years studying criminal patterns, dismantling networks of corruption, and working behind the scenes to ensure justice was served. And yet here she was, a federal agent, sitting in the back of a squad car, falsely accused. It was a twisted irony. Officer Reese glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his smirk returning now that he believed he had won. "Looks like you're not so untouchable after all," he muttered. Amelia didn't react. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, she took a slow, steady breath. She needed to think ahead. Every move mattered now. She could have revealed her identity immediately, but she knew that would only escalate things. Blindsiding him in court, that was the real strategy. So she waited. The car finally pulled up to the Atlanta Police Department, Zone 5 precinct, an old building with a stone facade, buzzing with late-night activity. Amelia's jaw clenched as Reese yanked open the door and gestured for her to step out. With deliberate slowness, she swung her legs out of the car and stood tall. She may have been handcuffed, but she refused to shrink. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a dull glow over the precinct's chaotic energy. Phones rang. Officers typed furiously on computers. A few glanced up, curiosity flickering in their eyes as they saw a woman in a crisp suit being led inside in cuffs. Reese guided her past the front desk, ignoring the questioning looks from fellow officers. "Got a break-in suspect here," he announced, handing off her ID to a nearby officer. The officer, a younger man with dark hair and tired eyes, glanced at Amelia's license, his brows furrowed. "Break-in," he repeated, clearly skeptical. "She doesn't exactly look like." "She fits the description." Reese cut in sharply. Amelia caught the flicker of uncertainty in the younger officer's face. Good, someone here had common sense. Still, they led her into a small interrogation room, dimly lit and cold. There was a steel table, 2 chairs, and a one-way mirror. She had been on the other side of these rooms countless times, questioning suspects, extracting confessions, and analyzing criminal behavior. Now, the roles were reversed. Reese leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his smirk never fading. "So," he said casually, as if they were having a friendly chat instead of a wrongful detainment, "you want to tell me where you really were tonight?" Amelia exhaled through her nose. She was done playing his game. "I already told you," she said, her voice steady and controlled. "I was at a restaurant downtown. I have an alibi. My friends can confirm it. There's security footage." Reese chuckled, shaking his head. "People lie," he said. "So do cops." Amelia shot back, her gaze locked onto his. For the first time, his smirk faltered. A knock at the door interrupted them. Another officer, Detective Morrow, stepped inside. A seasoned cop in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair. He held a manila folder in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. Amelia could tell he was different from Reese. He didn't carry the same arrogance. He pulled out a chair and sat across from Amelia. "Miss Jefferson," he began, his voice measured, "we're looking into your claim. You said you were at a restaurant downtown. We're in the process of pulling footage." Amelia gave a short nod. "Thank you." Reese snorted from the corner, clearly annoyed that they were even entertaining the possibility that she was innocent. Detective Morrow glanced at him. "Officer Reese, I'd like to speak with Ms. Jefferson alone." Reese tensed. That's an order." For a moment, a silent battle played out between them. Then, with a huff, Reese shoved off the wall and stormed out. Morrow waited until the door shut before turning back to Amelia. His gaze was sharp, assessing. "Something tells me you're not just an ordinary citizen," he said. Amelia hesitated. Could she trust him? He studied her carefully. "I ran a soft background check. You're listed as a data security consultant. That's a pretty vague job title." Amelia felt the walls closing in. She could keep up the act, or she could reveal the truth. She exhaled, slowly and deliberately. And then she made her choice. She leaned forward, her gaze never wavering. "Detective Morrow," she said, her voice lowering slightly. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room." Morrow raised a brow, but said nothing. Amelia reached into her inner jacket pocket and slowly pulled out a small black leather case. She flipped it open. The golden badge of a federal agent glinted under the harsh light. Morrow's eyes widened slightly. "I'm a federal agent," Amelia said, her voice even and unwavering. Morrow exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. "Well, Dan," he muttered. There it was. The shift. The moment he realized this case wasn't just another routine stop. This wasn't just another mistaken identity. This was about power, abuse, and corruption. Morrow sat back in his chair. "Does Reese know?" "No," Amelia said simply. "And he won't. Not until it's time." Morrow let out a slow whistle. "That's one hell of a chess move." Amelia nodded. She wasn't just playing the game. She was about to checkmate. The unraveling of lies. The air inside the interrogation room grew heavier as Detective Morrow leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the gleaming FBI badge in Amelia's hands. For a moment, the weight of what he had just learned settled between them in thick, tense silence. "Federal agent," Morrow muttered, shaking his head. "I knew something about this case felt off. But I didn't expect this." Amelia let her badge remain open on the cold steel table, letting the truth sink in. "I assume you understand the severity of this situation now, Detective," she said, her tone controlled but firm. Morrow sighed, rubbing his temple. He was a seasoned cop, someone who had seen it all. But even he seemed unsettled by what was unfolding in front of him. "This isn't just a wrongful arrest," he admitted. "This is a career-ending mistake for Officer Reese." Amelia's jaw tightened. "It's not just a mistake," she corrected him. "It's abuse of power. He saw me. He made assumptions, and then he made sure I couldn't walk away." Morrow winced at her words, but he didn't argue. Because she was right. She exhaled, pressing her hands together. "My question now, Detective, is how deep this goes." Morrow sat up straighter. What do you mean? Amelia studied him carefully. You and I both know this wasn't just about a supposed break-in. The way Reese handled it, his aggression, his refusal to acknowledge the facts, his eagerness to take me in despite no evidence, that's not just incompetence. Morrow's expression darkened. It's personal, he finished for her. Amelia nodded. Which means, she continued, Officer Reese is either covering for someone, or he has a history of this kind of behavior. Morrow sighed and ran a hand through his graying hair. I don't disagree, he admitted. But calling out an officer, especially in this department, isn't as easy as you think. Amelia's stare hardened. Nothing about this is easy, she said. But I'm not leaving here without ensuring that the right people know exactly what happened tonight. Morrow drummed his fingers against the table, deep in thought. Finally, he stood up. I'm going to check something, he said. Stay here. Amelia folded her arms, but gave him a single nod. She wasn't going anywhere. The unraveling begins. 45 minutes passed. Amelia stayed put, her eyes locked onto the door. Her mind was a battlefield of thoughts. Who else was involved? How many people in this department were willing to cover for Officer Reese? Then, finally, the door swung open. Morrow stepped back inside, his expression grim. I found something, he said, dropping a file onto the table. Amelia picked it up, flipping it open. What she saw sent a cold wave through her. It was a report, multiple complaints against Officer Reese, use of excessive force, racial profiling allegations, unlawful detainment of multiple individuals, all of them black or Latino. Amelia clenched her jaw. How is he still on the force? She demanded, anger flaring in her chest. Morrow shook his head. Because no one who files complaints ever wins. Every time someone tried, their case mysteriously got dropped. Amelia exhaled slowly, her mind working at full speed. Who's protecting him? She asked. Morrow hesitated. Then, finally, he answered. The police union, and more importantly, the precinct captain. Amelia wasn't shocked, but she still felt her stomach tighten. Then this is bigger than Reese, she murmured. Morrow nodded. Amelia tapped her fingers against the table, her thoughts racing. She could play this two ways. Take her release, walk away, and file an internal investigation through the FBI. Expose Officer Reese in court, right then and there. She already knew which one she was going to choose. Morrow must have read the decision in her eyes. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked, his voice lower now. Amelia looked up at him. Her gaze was unwavering. This isn't just about me anymore, she said. If we don't expose this now, he'll do it to someone else. Morrow exhaled. Then I'll back you up, he said. Amelia smiled for the first time that night. Good, she said, because I think it's time I let Officer Reese know exactly who he tried to arrest. Courtroom showdown. The next morning, Amelia walked through the towering doors of the Atlanta courthouse. She was no longer the suspect. She was the one bringing justice. The courtroom was packed. Reporters had already caught wind of the case, filling the gallery with quiet murmurs. Amelia took her seat near the prosecution's table, her back straight, her presence commanding. Across from her, Officer Reese sat with his attorney, looking smug. That wouldn't last long. The judge entered. Proceedings began. And then, when it was finally Amelia's turn to speak, she stood, walked forward, and in one swift motion, she pulled her FBI badge from her jacket pocket and held it up for the entire courtroom to see. Gasps echoed throughout the room. Reese's smug grin vanished, and for the first time, Amelia had all the power, the fall of a lie and the rise of justice. The courtroom had never been so silent. Every eye was locked onto Amelia Jefferson, standing tall in her perfectly tailored black suit, holding her FBI badge in the air like a gavel of truth. Officer Reese's smirk had disintegrated the moment she revealed her identity. His once confident posture had collapsed, and now he looked like a man drowning in his own lies. The judge adjusted his glasses, his brow furrowed as he stared at the gold-plated badge in Amelia's grip. "Miss Jefferson," he said slowly, his voice carrying through the courtroom, "are you telling me that you are a federal agent?" Amelia lowered her badge, locking eyes with the judge. "Yes, Your Honor. I am a federal intelligence officer working within the U.S. government, and I am not the suspect here. I am a victim of a false and malicious arrest by an officer who has now been exposed for his repeated misconduct." A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. The defense attorney for Officer Reese shot to his feet. "Objection. This is completely inappropriate. My client had no way of knowing." Amelia cut him off before the judge could respond. "That is exactly the problem," she said, her voice sharp as a knife. "Your client had no way of knowing who I was because he never bothered to find out the truth before he acted." She turned, facing the entire courtroom now. "This isn't about my credentials. This isn't about my title. This is about the fact that Officer Reese saw me, a black woman walking home at night, and he assumed I was guilty." Her word tongue in the air, weighty and impossible to ignore. Reese shifted uneasily in his seat. The prosecution's lead attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Dawson, rose from her chair with a slow, deliberate pace. "Your Honor," she said, "given what has just been revealed, I would like to request that all charges against Miss Jefferson be dropped immediately. Additionally, I request that Officer Reese's prior misconduct reports be reviewed as part of an internal investigation into his pattern of abuse." A wave of whispers swept through the gallery. The judge sighed, rubbing his temple as he turned to face Reese's attorney. "Counsel," the judge said, his tone exhausted, "do you still wish to proceed with defending your client?" The attorney hesitated. He glanced at Reese, whose face had drained of all color. Then, finally, he sat back down. "No further arguments, Your Honor." The judge turned to Amelia. "Miss Jefferson, you are free to go. I sincerely apologize for the wrongful arrest you endured." A loud cheer erupted in the courtroom. People clapped. Some even stood up in support. Reese slumped in his seat, his career crumbling before his eyes. But Amelia wasn't done. She turned to face him, her expression steady, powerful. "You see, Officer Reese," she said, "you thought you were in control. You thought you could abuse your power without consequences. But today, you learned something important." She stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his. "You never know who you're messing with." Reese said nothing, because there was nothing left for him to say. 1 week later, Amelia sat on her balcony, watching the city lights flicker against the Atlanta skyline. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jordan. "I just saw the news. Reese has been suspended pending an official investigation. Looks like the department finally had to face the truth." A smile tugged at Amelia's lips. Justice wasn't always immediate. It wasn't always clean. But this time, it had won. She took a deep breath, exhaling the weight of the past few weeks. Then, standing up, she stepped back inside, ready for whatever came next. Because Amelia Jefferson wasn't just a victim. She was a fighter, a survivor, and most importantly, a force to be reckoned with. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.